209. Yep, there are 209 skins that are currently in Marvel Rivals, and 53 of them belong to just one class, the Vanguards. Today, we're diving into every single Vanguard skin and picking the very best one for each of the tanks in the game. But here's the twist. This is not my list. This is actually your list. You guys got to pick your very best selections. Over the past few weeks, I've been running polls in the community tab on my channel, and tens of thousands of you guys have voted to decide which skins are truly the very best of the best. Now, of course, before we dive on in, let's go on ahead and take a quick moment, scroll on down, and smash that like button. Thank you guys so very much for your kindness and your continued support. And if we reach 1,000 likes on today's video, I'm going to do a very similar video, but for the duelist class, which is going to be insane because there are a lot of duelists and there are a lot of skins for those duelists as well. Regardless though, let's dive on in and see what you guys picked. And so we begin with America's ass emblem, Captain America. For Captain America, we have 6 possible skins to choose from, starting with the default design. A nice look that captures Cap's classic motif and color scheme while adding a little bit of that kind of super high-tech vibe of Marvel Rival. Then we have the somewhat controversial Captain AIM America, aka the Mustard Captain America. And I guess this one is really supposed to answer the question of what would Cap look like if he joined and worked for AIM instead of America. But in reality, this is of course just a recolor of his default costume. Next, we have Captain Gladiator, or what I personally like to call He-Man Cap, because obviously this is a very fantasy-inspired look for Steve Rogers. Then we have the Galactic Talon Captain America, who looks like straight up from something like Power Rangers or some type of a tokusatsu show, but I do really appreciate how unique it is relative to all of his other looks, which we can continue by taking a look at the next costume. Listen, you're gonna need to get this man a shield, because next up we have the first and actually only legendary costume of Captain America, and that is the Avengers Infinity War costume. And of course, last but certainly not least, we have the most recently released version of Cap. This is the Star Spangled design that is of course inspired by and is supposed to look like what Captain America would dress up if he went to a Hellfire Gala. So now it is results time. And keep in mind, YouTube does limit the voting to 4 options, so I picked the 4 most popular of the designs for you guys to vote on, them being the default look, Avengers Infinity War, Galactic Talon, and Star Spangled. And after 12,000, yes, you heard me correctly, votes, you guys voted for 4th place is the default design. In 3rd place is the Star Spangled style. In 2nd place, with just 17% of the vote, is the Galactic Talon design. And finally, with just a tad bit over 66% of the vote, which is absolutely bonkers, you guys voted by far the winning design for Captain America is the Avengers Infinity War costume. So next, we jump over to the Ice Queen, Emma Frost, who actually only has 4 skins available, and even then, one of them hasn't officially been released yet. But since she has been part of the roster for such a small amount of time, relatively speaking, I guess that's not really a surprise. We begin with her default look, which most certainly quite literally broke the internet and took the world by storm. Then we have the first of 2 recolors of that default look, which is the Golden Diamond recolor. This one is somewhat tough to judge right now since we don't have this one actually playable yet. Like, we know that it exists and we know that we're going to be awarded it at the midway point and the end point of this competitive season of Marvel Rivals, but we don't actually have it as a playable skin quite yet. Then we do have the Blue Sapphire recolor, which I actually quite like. I think it's a very nice and elegant look. And of course, finally, we have the X Revolution skin. And to the surprise of pretty much absolutely no one, after a little over 10,000 votes cast, you guys voted for the X Revolution skin as the very best by a massive margin, selecting it with 70% of the vote, followed by the Golden Diamond variant with 12% of the vote, then the default design with 10% of the vote, and finally, in last place, is the Blue Sapphire design with just 8% of the vote. After that, more like I am Groove. Am I right, guys? Bruh. So the next character we're talking about is obviously Groot. And Groot actually has 5 total skins currently available in the game. Kicking things off with, of course, his default look, which I think is pretty dang cool. I really like a lot of the Marvel Rivals skins that take an extra, I guess, attention to detail to pay attention to what these characters look like in the comics and try to interpret that comic accuracy into the game as well. And Groot definitely does that. I think that is a very, very big dub for this particular costume. Next up, we have his one and only recolor skin, which is the Abyss Algae, I think that is how it is pronounced, skin, which is just fine. Definitely not one of my personal favorites. We then have the incredibly epic Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 skin, which legitimately to me just feels like it was taken straight up from the movie screen and put into the game. And of course, I would be remiss to leave this next one out because we have the Holiday Happiness costume. This one was, of course, released around the holiday season and got you into that Christmas sort of mood and spirit. An absolutely terrific design. And finally, we also have the most recently released skin for Groot, which was actually earnable for free inside of the game by completing some in-game quests, and that is the Carved Traveler. Now, once again, over 10,000 of you guys cast your votes, and here are the results. You guys really did not let me down, with just a little over 50% of you guys voting the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 design as the very best costume. That is then followed by the Holiday Happiness costume with 24% of the vote. The Carved Traveler is actually not too far behind with 17% of the vote. And finally, 9% of the vote went to the default skin for Groot. Next up, we're talking about the genius of Bruce Banner, and I guess more importantly, his alter ego, the Hulk. Now, the Hulk actually sports 5 skins currently in the game, similarly to Groot, with only one of them being a legendary rarity. So let's run through all of the options. We do begin, of course, with the default look for both Banner and the Hulk. I do think it's important to actually take notice that obviously in the case of the Hulk, we actually have technically 3-in-1 skin most of the time that we're looking at, because we have Banner, we have Hulk, and then we have the frenzied version of the Hulk, or like the ultimate version. So there's a lot to look at here with this particular character. Next up, we move on to his first recolor skin, which is the Mighty G-Bomb variant, which for the most part is just a recolor of his skin from his default design, just over to a gray Hulk inspired look. We then jump over to the previously mentioned legendary skin, because this is the Green Scar. Marvel Rivals' take obviously on the World Breaker armor, and it is freaking fantastic. Just an iconic look for the Incredible Hulk, and this one is surely going to receive a lot of votes. I'd be shocked if it didn't. We then have probably the most divisive skin on this entire list, because this is the Punk Rage Hulk. I feel like this is the type of costume where some people absolutely love this design, and then there are people who absolutely hate it. There are not a whole lot of people that lie in between. And finally, we of course have the most recently released skin for the Hulk, and that being the Joe Fixit Hulk. Now, I personally love that Marvel Rivals chose to include this one in the latest Battle Pass, but at the same time, I kind of wish that it looked a bit more similar to his actual design from the comics, instead of this like hyper stylized approach that they went with. But again, that's just my own personal nitpick, and hey, like I said at the top, this ain't about me, it's about what you guys voted. So let's find out what over 14,000 of you guys think with your vote. You have selected in first place Joe Fixit with a dominant 69% of the vote.
Nice.
Followed by the green Scar skin with just 18% of the vote. Then, interestingly enough, we have a draw for third / I guess fourth place because both the default and the Punk Rage versions received 7% of the vote. So next up, we're talking about one of the absolute best Vanguards in the entire game, and that is, of course, Magneto. Now, Magneto, similarly to the Hulk, only has 5 costumes to choose from, but unlike the Hulk, he currently still has not gotten a legendary costume, which honestly is quite surprising, especially considering how popular of a character he is. But regardless, first and foremost, we have the default design, which is a nice redesign of his iconic look while applying that Marvel Rivals flair. We then have the Will of Galacta variant of Magneto, which definitely ratchets things up in terms of the color department for his original costume. It's essentially obviously just a recolor of his original look, but I always do kind of appreciate this one just due to the fact that this one was actually free with Twitch drops, so that will always make it somewhat cool. And of course, since we're on the topic of recolors, Magneto is one of those rare Marvel Rivals characters that actually has 2 recolors of his default costume, the previously mentioned Will of Galacta, and then we also have the Uncanny Black Steel, which honestly, I think it looks quite cool since it has this very cool kind of grounded color scheme. It looks a little bit more toned down, a little more realistic looking, but I guess if you do love the classic Magneto color scheme, you're certainly to be a huge fan of the next skin, which is the Master of Magnetism costume, which tries to pay homage to Magneto's classic look from all the way back in Uncanny X-Men #1 back in 1981. And finally, we have the much more dapper version of Magneto, which is titled the King Magnus, based on his appearance in the House of M comic book series line, and obviously supposed to also be released in tandem with, hey, what would Magneto look like if he were to attend the Hellfire Gala? But now, it is time to go on ahead and find out how over 14,000, yes, of you guys have voted. So, in first place, we have, with an absolutely impressive and somewhat surprising 70% of the vote going to the Master of Magnetism. Seems like people really do love that classic look for Magneto. He's then followed by King Magnus with 23% of the vote, 4% of the vote goes to Will of Galacta design, and finally, in last place with just 2% of the vote is the default costume. Next up, we're talking Penny Parker and Spider, or SPDR, however you'd like to pronounce it. Now, Penny, similarly to Magneto, once again, another tank that has 5 costumes available. Starting with her default look, which I think looks absolutely awesome. They were able to take a very, very complicated design for this character, usually in the comics, and convert it to a really epic looking both battle suit and character inside of Marvel Rivals. We then have a handful of recolors to actually look at with her because she's one of those weird characters that until just recently didn't really have a whole lot of variety to her skins. So first and foremost, we have the Olive Skimmer, which is just essentially a green recolor of her default suit. Now, if you're more of a fan of the color blue, you'll probably be happy to know that the Blue Tarantula costume exists, and it's once again just literally a recolor of her default suit into a blue color scheme. Then finally, in somewhat the recolor department, I guess, we have Venom, which the reason why I'm saying it's somewhat in that department is because this is not just a straight up recolor. I actually do really like that they took the effort to differentiate this one by at least changing the hairstyle for Penny herself and the head sculpt on the SPDR armor, making it uniquely different and not just a recolor. Finally, like I previously mentioned, most recently she got a proper skin, which is the Yatsu Kahagi skin. This is an awesome collaboration between Marvel Rivals and comic book artist superstar Peach Momoko, where they went ahead and asked her to redesign some of the characters in Marvel Rivals, and this was the result for Penny Parker and SPDR. Now, of course, let's find out what you guys chose as the very best. We have 9,000 over 9,000 votes to tabulate, and here are the results. In somewhat unsurprisingly, we have first place with 57% of the vote is the newest Yatsukahagi skin. Definitely not surprised that you guys think that's the best one. I definitely agree with you on that front. But what was equally impressive was that 33% of the vote actually went to the Venom skin. I was definitely kind of pleasantly surprised to see that. Then we have 8% of the vote going to the default costume, and then just 2% of the vote going to the Olive Skimmer recolor. So here's the thing. In all seriousness, the thing literally only has 4 costumes in the game, just like Emma Frost, which I hope that all of you Thing mains have something to look forward to, and hopefully you'll be getting some cool skins here very soon on the horizon. But let us begin with the default design, which I actually really like. And I know I said that this is not my list, but spoiler alert, I actually think that this default costume is his very best one. But I'm very curious to see if you guys agree or disagree. We then move on to one of 2 recolors, which is going to be the first family recolor, which is pretty dang basic. I mean, for the most part, all of his recolors are going to be pretty dang basic because, well, the only clothing that the character wears is his shorts, so there's really not too much to actually recolor. And speaking of recolors, next up, we have the Unlimited costume, which was part of a promotion between Marvel Rivals and Marvel Unlimited. And finally, his only epic rarity skin is the Trenchcoat costume, which is obviously supposed to be an homage to that classic look of the Thing in his trenchcoat all the way back in Fantastic Four #1 back in 1961. Now, a lot of you guys wanted to actually weigh in with your opinions on this one because we have over 16,000 votes to go through, and unsurprisingly, 85% of those votes went to the Trenchcoat Thing. Sheesh, that is insanely impressive. Most dominant win so far. We then have, interestingly enough, the Unlimited recolor with 6% of the vote, then the first family design with just 5% of the vote, and finally, my favorite version of the Thing only received 4% of the vote, that being just his default design. Man, it really seems like most people are not really big fans of the default skins in Marvel Rivals. Next up, we're talking about the God of Thunder, Thor. And similarly to Captain America, he has 6 costumes available to him in this game, starting with the default look, which I personally quite like since it really captures the fantasy themes of Thor and what he usually kind of embodies, so I really do like the vibe of the default design. Then, like always, we have a recolor skin, and this one here is titled the Midgard Umber skin, which honestly seems quite basic even for a recolor costume. Like, it just seems very uninspired. Then we have the Herald of Thunder, which is an awesome look for Thor, based on the Donny Cates comic book series from back in 2020. We then have Reborn from Ragnarok, which is a nice and cheap to obtain costume, actually, costing you only 800 units to acquire, while capturing a very cool and iconic version of the God of Thunder. We then have his one and only legendary skin, which is once again, similarly to Captain America, is based on an MCU movie, except in the case of Captain America, his legendary skin was actually based on an awesome movie, whereas Thor's is based on the turd that is Thor Love and Thunder. But do not get me started on that movie, because I cannot stand it, but I'm not going to rant about that. That is a story for a whole nother time. Finally, we have the latest to be released Thor costume. This is, of course, the Lord of Asgard version of Thor, which is actually based on a comic book appearance from all the way back in 1998. But now, let's find out how 12,000 of you guys feel about Thor, and more importantly, the costumes that he has available to him in Marvel Rivals. Surprisingly, at least to me, 70% of the vote went to the Lord of Asgard skin. That was absolutely shocking, and I would not have ever guessed that. We then have 17% of the vote actually going to Reborn from Ragnarok, followed by the Herald of Thunder receiving 10% of the vote, and finally, the default costume once again gets very little love with just 3% of the vote. Next up, we're talking about yet another super duper popular tank in the game. In fact, quite possibly the single most popular tank in the game, even though they do continue to try to nerf this character into the ground, and that is of course Doctor Strange. Now, Doctor Strange, similarly to the last Vanguard that we just talked about, he has 6 skins available to him as well, starting with his default attire, followed by his one and actually only recolor skin, which is the Master of Black Magic. We then have his ridiculously epic Sorcerer Supreme of the Galaxy design, based on his comic book appearance in the Strange series from 2018. Then we have the creepy 3-eyed God of Magic attire, which is based on, once again, a comic book appearance, issue number 384 of Doctor Strange back from 2015, so about a decade ago. And then interestingly, Doctor Strange is the only Vanguard that has not just one, but 2 legendary skins. First, we get the Sorcerer Immortal variant, which is an all-original costume released exclusively for Marvel Rivals back in January of this very year, 2025. And then most recently, he obviously received the uber popular Multiverse of Madness skin that most of the community likes to refer to as Zombie Strange. So now let's see how you guys voted. But first, a little warning on this one, because at the time of posting the poll, Zombie Strange was just kind of like a leaked character that we didn't know when he was actually going to arrive. So he wasn't available to be voted on. So that's my bad. But we still went ahead and calculated 10,000 votes that you guys dropped on the poll. And interestingly enough, you guys chose the God of Magic as the best skin with 62% of the vote, followed by the Sorcerer Supreme of the Galaxy with 17% of the vote, then the Sorcerer Immortal with 12% of the vote, and finally the default skin with just 9% of the vote. Okay, you know what? I'm making an executive decision. Let's all be honest. Zombie Strange is Doctor Strange's best skin, so I'm reworking the list, and he's actually going to win. So we're going to go with Zombie Strange, then the God of Magic, and the rest of the list follows. And finally, we have Venom, who is actually the only Vanguard, and might even be the only character in the entire game, who already has 7 total skins available, starting with his default costume, which I think will ultimately go down as one of the coolest reinterpretations of the Lethal Protector. I think they absolutely freaking cooked here. We then have one of 3 recolor skins available to Venom, starting with Anti-Venom, which essentially just basically inverts the black and white color scheme on the classic Venom design that we just taken a look at. We then have one of the most exclusive and rare skins in the game with the Cyan Clash Venom. This one was exclusive to the closed beta players of Marvel Rivals, and obviously is inspired by his look from the classic Marvel vs. Capcom fighting games. And finally, on the recolor side of things, we have the Hyper Orange Venom, or the community likes to call it the Fanta Venom, or Nickelodeon Venom, whatever you want to call this one. This is actually the most recently released Venom recolor costume and costume in general, and of course it was also part of that bundle that they recently released for Marvel Rivals. Now, as far as the more premium skins are concerned, first we have the Space Knight Venom design, which is based on his appearance from Venom Space Knight comics from back in 2015. Next, we have the Lingering Imprint design, which is also nicknamed as Agent Venom by the community, even though it's technically not Agent Venom. It's just kind of like the echoes of Venom being Agent Venom. But regardless, this gets into crazy Venom lore, so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Regardless, it's a really, really cool design. And finally, finally, we have Venom's one and only legendary costume, which is the Snow Symbiote design, an all-original Marvel Rivals skin that I am super curious to see how you guys perceive as to whether or not you actually like it, because I am actually not that big of a fan of this one. Well, I guess let's find out how 16,000 of you went ahead and voted. In first place, with 59% of the vote, holy moly, we have the Fanta Venom. No, I'm joking. Actually, it is the Snow Symbiote, which I was very, very surprised to see, just because I don't particularly love this design. Like, I always like the designs that are the closest to the original looks of characters. So I wasn't particularly fond of this one, but man, oh man, you guys seem to be big fans of that look. Then we have 22% of the vote going to the lingering imprint design, followed by the default design getting a very, very impressive 13% of the vote, which I think is the highest rating for a default skin so far. So that is definitely pretty dang impressive. And 6% of the vote also did go to the Space Knight. So there you guys have it. That is over 50 different skins that we have taken a look at and ranked in Marvel Rivals. Like I mentioned at the top of the video, if you guys would like to see a similar video that will be, oh my goodness, so freaking long. I can't even imagine how many skins we have to look at. But if you want to see a video like this for the Duelist class, go on ahead and scroll down, smash the thumbs up button, share the video with a fellow Marvel Rivals or Marvel fan, and of course, like always, I hope you all have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day. Peace out. I'll see y'all later, alligators. Bye-bye, everybody.